general questions, before we come to First Minister's questions, I'm sure members will wish to join me in welcoming to our gallery the Ambassador of Estonia to the United Kingdom, Her Excellency Aino Lepik von Vieren. We come now to questions to the First Minister. Question number 1 from Ian Gray.
To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
Well, later today I am meeting with the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Sustainable Growth, who is visiting the global asset management firm BlackRock Investment. BlackRock are establishing their new global centre for fund accounting in Edinburgh, creating up to 250 jobs. I am sure the whole Chamber will wish to welcome this project and BlackRock's ongoing expansion, which is a substantial boost to the financial services sector in Scotland.
Ian Gray.
Presiding Officer, the fiasco of the gathering continues to dog the First Minister's reputation. Around £700,000 of taxpayers' money was lost. According to Jim Mather, in a reply to a parliamentary question, the First Minister called Steve Cardowney, the SNP group leader in Edinburgh City Council, on 9 October 2009. Mr Mather says, "The First Minister discussed the financial difficulties of the Gathering Limited with Mr Cardowney in that call." Is that true?
First Minister.
The call, if I remember correctly, was to invite Edinburgh Council to a meeting which took place. These matters were examined extensively on committee, and the answers I gave there are the answers which stand. I was very happy to appear before the Parliamentary Committee. I was very happy to answer these questions, and I suggest that Ian Gray consults the record to inform himself.
Ian Gray.
Presiding Officer, I have consulted the record and these matters have been looked at extensively. The trouble is, questions remain to be answered. Mr Mather says the First Minister discussed the financial difficulties of the gathering with Mr Cardowney, but on 3rd November, Mr Cardowney told the Audit Committee, with reference to the same call, the First Minister did not appraise me over the telephone as to what the issue was. Mr Mather and Mr Cardowney cannot both be right. The First Minister was on the call. It is his reputation which is on the line. Who is telling the truth?
First Minister.
Well, I just point out Councillor Cardowney is the representative in Edinburgh who is in charge of events, hence the call to Councillor Cardowney. As you will consult the record, you will realise that I invited a range of other people to the meeting, which was held in St Andrew's House. The subject of the meeting was the future of the gathering and to see how we could sustain the event, which generated some £10 million for the Scottish economy, and see how the event could go forward in the future. That was the purpose of the meeting. As I said before the committee, my regret is that we were not able to find or to follow through on a plan which would have both secured the future of the gathering for the City of Edinburgh and indeed recompensed the outstanding creditors. But actually, Ian Gray is not seriously suggesting that inviting the Edinburgh Council to a meeting, inviting other people to a meeting with the intention of doing two things: securing the financial future of that particular event and securing the event for the future of the Scottish economy, where it generated £10 million, is in any sense a bad thing. I sort of think that's the sort of thing that government should be doing. And incidentally, if the committee had found anything untoward about that series of answers, then no doubt the members of the committee would have wanted to pursue that aspect. So rather than second-guess what the committee did and didn't do, I think Ian Gray should accept that the intention of the government was to secure the future of an event which generated some £10 million for the Scottish economy.
Great.
Knowing what to believe matters here, because what did follow from the meeting the First Minister refers to was a press release written by the First Minister's officials but issued by the City of Edinburgh Council. it contained the sentence, DEMA, that is
Order,
the council...
order. Mr Gray is entitled to ask about whatever subject he wishes to ask about. Mr Gray.
I can understand why the First Minister doesn't want us to keep pursuing this. The press release contains the sentence, DEMA, that is the Council, will take on the Gathering 2009 Limited's remaining private sector obligations. 103 small businesses owed money believed that commitment. But the SNP council leader now denies he ever made that promise. While the First Minister and his SNP colleague in the City Chambers are playing pass the parcel, the creditors are carrying the can. Who is liable for those obligations? Steve Cardowney and the Council, or the First Minister and the Scottish Government?
First Minister.
No, just as a matter of point in fact, for no other reason, and it is reasonably important if you're asking a series of questions to try and get a few facts right. Steve Cardowney is the Deputy Leader of Edinburgh Council. As I understand, the Leader of Edinburgh Council is a Liberal Democrat. Well, it's just a point of straight fact, and I know Ian Gray has a great attachment to a factual basis for questions. The committee report examines the matter of the Council press release in some detail. I think Ian Gray should perhaps again familiarise himself with the contents of the committee report that the committee came to the conclusion of. But I'm just struggling to understand, and incidentally, if Ian Gray wants to ask as many questions as he chooses from now until the end of this parliamentary session on this matter, then fair enough. Except I suspect that there's a number of people in Scottish society would see the economy, see jobs, see the fuel tax. I mean, it's probably a case, is it not, of the dog that didn't bark. What's revealing about Ian Gray is not the questions he asks, it's the questions he's frightened to ask.
Order. Ian Gray.
Presiding Officer, I know exactly who Steve Cardowney is. He is the person who is carrying the can for the First Minister. And I think that the people of Scotland believe that the reputation of their First Minister is a matter of some importance. Let's look at this affair. It started off with a secret loan from the First Minister, now written off. Then he tried to sell off the Gathering Limited without the knowledge of its own directors, and he failed. Then he tried to pass liability to the City of Edinburgh Council, but that fix failed too. Councillor Cardowney faces a no-confidence vote. Creditors face ruin, 103 local businesses. And taxpayers potentially face multi-million-pound legal bills. When will the First Minister finally face up to his responsibility for this fiasco?
First Minister.
My responsibility was to try and repair the finances of the individual event and secure the future of the event for Scotland. The reason that's a governmental responsibility is the event itself generated £10 million for the Scottish economy, £8 million for the City of Edinburgh. In the blithe assertions of a no-confidence motion, as I understand the situation at Edinburgh Council, that's a Labour opposition no-confidence motion in the administration of the Council, or perhaps the Conservative Party's no-confidence motion, which no doubt the Labour Party will want to support. Well, I hear the sully tones of Lord George Fulks. I would have been delighted to answer Lord George's questions at the committee if he had bothered to turn up to ask me any questions. But the committee members who did turn up asked a range of questions which I was delighted to answer. And what I think emerged from the committee was the purpose of the government to secure the future of the event. the wish of the government to do everything it could in terms of helping the position of the creditors. I regret the fact that Edinburgh Council were not able to follow through with the plan that evolved from that meeting. I regret it because in terms of the individual creditors, but I regret it also in terms, I think it was a magnificent event which would have been fitting of the Edinburgh calendar for the future. And if Ian Gray just at some point will accept that those who are participating in that meeting and in supporting the gathering, myself, Councillor Cardowney, the various other officials out there, the various other politicians who supported the event, were doing it in a positive light to secure something of value for the Scottish economy and the City of Edinburgh. I have to say, from start to finish, I have not seen anything positive from the Labour Party in terms of looking at this event, as opposed to a rather incompetent occasional attempt to seize some little political advantage. And of course, the reason that Ian Gray did not want to ask about fuel tax, just in case anybody has missed it, is when the rest of this Parliament were voting against the rises in fuel tax, Ian Gray decided to lead the Labour Party into another abstention.
Question to Annabel Goldie.
To ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Secretary of State for Scotland.
First Minister.
No plans to meet the Secretary of State in the near future.
Annabel Goldie.
Presiding Officer, on Saturday in this Parliament, I and many women from all over Scotland will celebrate International Women's Day, an occasion filled with pleasure and pride. But for some women in Scotland, there are other occasions which should be filled with pleasure and pride, but instead can be the dark prelude to a night of fear and violence. And I'm talking about the surge in domestic abuse after high-profile football matches. Strathclyde Police have reported that last weekend's Old Firm clash resulted in nearly double the number of incidents of domestic abuse compared to the average Sunday. And what the effect of last night's disgraceful scenes will be, I dread to think. Now, of course, regrettably, alcohol plays a part in domestic abuse, but that can never be an excuse for such behaviour. Will the First Minister agree that this connection between football and escalating domestic abuse is repugnant, disgraceful and utterly unacceptable?
First Minister.
Yes, I do agree with that, and can I thank Annabel Goldie for asking a substantial question about a substantial issue in Scottish society. The Deputy First Minister will also be attending the event to which Annabel Goldie referred. Annabel Goldie knows the approach of this administration, I believe the approach of the entire Parliament to the issue of domestic abuse. The funding for the agencies actively involved in combating domestic abuse has been doubled. The legal loophole has been closed by this Parliament by assent in terms of introducing a fence to make sure that nobody can escape the consequences on detection of domestic abuse, and that was a wise decision by this Parliament. The innovative Caledonian project has been introduced, which is victim-centred in terms of forcing people to address particularly violence of men against women, their offending behaviour. All these things are being done. And as Annabel Goldie rightly says, while drink is never ever a defence against crimes against people, then neither, of course, is your team losing a football match. Yeah. These things are not a defence, will never be treated by defence, and I believe this Parliament will always unite to combat the evil of domestic abuse in Scotland.
Annabel Goldie.
And I thank the First Minister for the tenor of that response. Presiding Officer, there is a huge moral obligation on football clubs, their management and their players to set the highest examples of responsible behaviour. In short, if they start behaving like thugs, without a shadow of a doubt, minority elements of their supporters will also start behaving like thugs. And for many women and children, that will translate into the horror and misery of domestic abuse. And I need hardly add that disgraceful scenes such as those from last night's Old Firm clash merely inflame these undercurrents of tension. Will the First Minister discuss these issues with me and the other party leaders? And does he agree that there is a need for an urgent summit between the two football clubs involved, the football authorities and the police, so that these football encounters become less about fear, violence and disgrace, and much more about being occasions of pleasure and pride for Scotland?
First Minister.
I do agree with that, and I'll be happy to discuss these matters with the party leaders. Can I say that the Chief Constable of Strathclyde Police spoke to me this morning, and he's also written to the Justice Secretary, asking the Government to convene a round-table discussion between the Old Firm clubs and the Scottish Football Association to chart a way forward in terms of Old Firm encounters. I'm happy to confirm that that summit will take place next week, and that all parties have agreed to attend. In terms of how people's actions have an impact on society, then the fans at football matches are representatives of their clubs. The players at football matches are role models for society. And the management of football clubs have a particular responsibility. They are people in positions of responsibility, and they absolutely must behave responsibly. And that will happen. It should be said that both clubs, both Celtic and Rangers, have extensive community programmes. They have both shown themselves well capable in the past of expressing solidarity with each other and with wider society. I was at the funeral of Tommy Burns, where Walter Smith and Alan McCoist carried the coffin. I know that John Reid laid a wreath with the Deputy First Minister at the commemoration of the Ibrox disaster. So both clubs have shown themselves well capable of expressing solidarity with each other and wider society. But the scenes last night, the disgraceful scenes last night, it cannot be ignored. I think the initiative from Strathclyde Police is a welcome one. I hope that Annabel Goldie agrees with that. And the Government will be happy to convene that summit to chart a way forward and to make sure that all parties, Government included, and the SFA and the clubs, are mindful of their obligations and wider role in Scottish society as a whole.
Question 3, Tavish Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what issues will be discussed at the next meeting of his Cabinet.
First Minister.
Next meeting of the Cabinet will discuss issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Tavish Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Parliament's Economy Committee has produced a very strong report which says that the Quango Scottish Enterprise and Skills Development Scotland are not working. The report says there is clutter and confusion. Scotland's economy needs to grow. So what's the First Minister's response to these widespread concerns over this clutter and this confusion?
First Minister.
A growth strategy, as we launched in a document last week for the Scottish economy, which is to reprofile our economy on growth companies and growth sectors in growth markets. That is a sensible, productive growth strategy. I should say it's supported by Scottish Enterprise. There have been some spectacular examples in recent weeks of the impact of Scottish Enterprise in its role as an agency both to foster and encourage investment into Scotland. There have been examples of growth companies, international companies like Amazon, local companies as the new games venture in Dundee, which Scottish Enterprise have played a substantial role in. And I think, given that role of excellence, which has been incidentally acknowledged internationally, I think it would be very foolish not to acknowledge it and recognise the work that it does. As far as Skill Development Scotland is concerned, then what I see is that this coming year there are going to be almost 100,000 skills places agreed through Scottish society. Modern apprenticeships alone will be at 25,000, 60% higher than the level we inherited when we came to office 4 years ago. And they will be delivered by an agency, Skill Development Scotland, with a much smaller management team and bureaucracy. And the fact that they are able to, and have demonstrated this last year of that ability, should be recognised by this Parliament and by its parliamentary committees.
Tavish Scott.
Presiding Officer, our Freedom of Information requests show that in the last year, Skills Development Scotland and Scottish Enterprise have spent another £4.5 million on PR consultants and marketing. But the Parliament report says people still don't know what Skills Development Scotland is supposed to do, and it doesn't even seem to have the responsibility for the government's own skills strategy. Does the First Minister think they should spend even more money on advertising next year to get the message across? Or is it time for different choices? Wouldn't the £4.5 million have been better invested in an exports plan to drive an export-based recovery? or an internship programme with Scottish employers so that young graduates can get their careers started? Wouldn't those be better solutions for Scotland?
First Minister.
I know that Tavish Scott must be aware of the Smarter Exporter plan with the Chambers of Commerce, pioneered by Scottish Enterprise at the present moment, which is the enthusiastic support of the Chambers and involves and galvanises the company sector itself in the exporting effort. I know he will also be aware that, for example, the Amazon investment is not a question of just fulfilling the needs of the United Kingdom market. It is a platform, particularly for small exporters, to export worldwide, a platform which many companies have not had hitherto. Scotland has done well in our international exports, but they have been concentrated in major industries and major companies. The challenge, the Smarter Exporter challenge, is to extend that through the company sector in Scottish society. But could I just caution the Liberal Democrats, and I welcome Tavish Scott centring on this issue above all at the present moment, but I don't think when Skills Development Scotland, as the delivery agency for placing skills in Scottish society, is about to achieve, and will achieve this coming year, almost 100,000 skill placements, when it is going to have 25,000 modern apprenticeships placed across Scottish society, the first 500 of which I announced just last Friday in the energy sector. This seems hardly the time, as the Liberal Democrats advise, to tear up and say they are going to abolish Skills Development Scotland. Surely we should be supporting Skills Development Scotland in this delivery plan to obtain a record amount of apprenticeships and other skills training in the Scottish economy and Scottish society.
Question for Nigel Dunn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government has concerns regarding clauses in the Scotland Bill that could result in appeals for Scottish criminal cases moving to the UK Supreme Court.
First Minister.
Well, the Scottish Government has grave concerns. The final criminal court of appeal in the Scottish legal system should be the High Court of Judiciary. This principle, which was confirmed by the House of Lords in 1876, has been undermined by the Scotland Act's unwitting, in some cases, approach to devolution issues. The Scotland Bill should be seen as an opportunity to put that right. However, it appears that the UK Government intend to instead force clauses into the Scotland Bill, clauses as yet unpublished and unseen by the general public and MSPs and MPs, but to put these clauses into the Scotland Bill, which would further undermine, in our view, the independence of the Scottish criminal justice system. I am extremely disappointed that whatever else it did or didn't do, that the Scotland Bill Committee has not seen fit to raise concerns about that.
Nigel Dunn.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I reflect, first of all, Presiding Officer, that there wasn't the best of questions that I have ever written, because, of course, these are only proposals, and indeed they're not in the Scotland Bill yet. They are actually unpublished, as the First Minister has already said, and therefore will not be consulted on and may yet be foisted on this country. Can I ask the First Minister whether there is anything he feels that he can actually do at this stage to ensure the independence of the Scottish criminal justice system?
First Minister.
Well, as Nigel Donald will have noted, the Constitutional Affairs Minister has been extremely active on this very subject, trying to ventilate in public what it seems that the Advocate General wants to keep in secret. Well, there is a point of principle. Let's depart for a second from the issue under discussion, and let's consider.
Order. Fairly briefly, First Minister, please.
Would never let me do unless I was pointing out the underlying principle of a parliament being able to actually see a clause in a bill that it's meant to be examining. I don't know of any precedent in any parliament where we're being asked to pass something or give approval to something that the generality of the parliament, either in Scotland or London, hasn't even seen.
Robert Brown.
Well, of course, Presiding Officer, the recommendations that are going to go in the Scotland Bill are based on an expert report, aren't they, under the heading of Lord Edward, and they were in fact the subject of a public announcement by the Advocate General for Scotland. Can the First Minister confirm whether or not the Scottish Government wishes to be bound by the European Convention on Human Rights anyway, and if so, can he tell the Chamber why he regards a delay of 3 or 4 years to hear a case in Strasbourg before a court which contains no Scottish judges at all is preferable to a speedier resolution by the United Kingdom Supreme Court, which on Scottish cases is led by the two distinguished Scottish judges on that court.
First Minister.
Can I perhaps try and correct Robert Brown's misunderstandings on the issue? On the first issue, he seems confident of what is in these clauses. Well, I don't know if Robert Brown has seen these clauses. What I do know is the rest of the... Yes, I have seen them, which is why when I...
Order.
Which is why...
Order.
When I raise concerns about them, I might be in a position of more knowledge than Robert Brown, who seems to wish to approve them without even seeing them at all. So when
Order. The Chamber will come to order.
Of
First
this
Minister.
Parliament is accorded the same privilege of being allowed to see the clauses, then perhaps we can have a parliamentary debate as to whether the concerns of this government about what is being proposed to us reflects the expert group or indeed poses dangers for the independence of the Scottish judicial system. And in terms of the European Court on Human Rights, the issue is whether or not our jurisdiction has the same rights and ability as any other jurisdiction in Europe before that court, or whether we will have, as we had in the Cadder case, 7 judges in the High Court of Judiciary in Scotland being second-guessed in their opinion by 2 judges in the Supreme Court in London. Why on earth should Robert Brown or any other member of this chamber not believe that this nation is capable of having its own court of appeal in this country, and this country is capable of answering to a human rights court elsewhere? Treat us as a position of equality with any other jurisdiction in this continent.
Question 5, Cathy Craigie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what recent discussions the Scottish Government has had with the Scottish Sensory Centre at the University of Edinburgh.
First Minister.
The Scottish Government officials have regular contact with the Scottish Sensory Centre and their employers. Last met with the University on the 14th of December last year, are also members of the Centre's Advisory Committee.
Cathy Craigie.
Is the First Minister aware that the Teachers in Scotland Regulation 2005 required teachers of sensory impaired children to hold a specialist qualification, the achievement of which is supported by the Sensory Centre, the only one of its kind in Scotland? And by working with those involved in the education of young people with a sensory impairment, the Centre is promoting innovation, good practice and expert support across Scotland. The First Minister should by now be aware of the widespread concern about his government's decision to withdraw funding for the SSC. Is he aware of the impact of his decision to cut funding for ongoing training of specialist teachers who work to ensure the best educational outcomes for a very vulnerable group of children? Does he regret that there has been no consultation, and will he take immediate action to reverse the decision? This centre costs the taxpayer £200,000 per annum. I think funding that is the sort of thing that a government should be doing.
First Minister.
I know that Cathy Craigie would want to put the issue into the context of the funding in terms of the front line. It will be funding Donaldson School and the Royal Blind School as grant-aided special schools with £4.5 million to support children and young people with sensory impairments. We have protected £305,000 of funding from Call Scotland, who are also based at Edinburgh University, and provide children with technological solutions to overcome their barriers to learning. And we have also provided Call Scotland with an additional £27,000 this year to enhance their Scottish text-to-speech software. We have also provided £66,000 to update the state-of-art National Equipment Bank, which lends devices to young people to test before local authorities. I mention these things because I know that Cathy Craigie would want to put the issue into the context of the support. But I would be very happy indeed to convene a meeting with the University and the Sensory Centre, with our officials and ministers, to discuss to see if there is a way forward. But can we do that on the basis that this government, regardless of the £1,300 million cutback in funding, is anxious indeed, as these figures demonstrate, to support people engaged in this activity. And on that basis, with goodwill, I will convene the meeting that I suggested.
Question 6, Ian Smith.
Presiding Officer, can I ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government considers that Scotland's enterprise network is meeting its economic growth objectives and represents value for public money?
First Minister.
Well, yes, I do. The efforts of the enterprise agencies are benefiting the Scottish economy. They are helping Scotland out of a recession which was difficult, very difficult indeed, but shorter and shallower than that of the United Kingdom. The most recent labour market statistics also show that over recent periods, Scotland has been the only nation in the United Kingdom with falling unemployment and rising employment. And members will be glad to note that Scottish Enterprise account managed business increased turnover by £379 million in 2009, and Highlands and Islands enterprise account managed businesses are expected to generate an additional £75 million to the economy over the next 3 years.
Ian Smith.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. The Government's reforms of the enterprise and skills agencies was meant to declutter the landscape. However, the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee's inquiry found instead that there was a more complex set of governance arrangements since the reforms, and a lack of clarity and understanding has resulted. This is particularly the case in the delivery of skills. So does the First Minister agree with me that there has been too much focus since the reforms on strategic forums and working groups, and too little focus on ensuring the coordination of the delivery of services to meet the needs of businesses on the ground?
First Minister.
I think that Ian Smith's criticisms are a bit unworthy. I noticed the committee itself recommended no structural change. I also noticed in evidence to the committee we had unity between the CBI and the STUC. The CBI said our members on the whole are of the view that the publicly funded support currently on offer from the enterprise networks is of genuine assistance at reasonable cost. And the STUC says the STUC does not share the view that economic development agencies are unnecessary, that economic development should be returned to business through tax cuts. The networks are engaged currently in much valuable activity that would never have been pursued or funded by the private sector alone. There is an assent among business, among the trade unions, that our enterprise network is successfully pursuing a range of activities, and there are certainly, and I would caution Ian Smith and advise him to reflect on the statistics I quoted to Tavish Scott. The Skills Development Agency is about to deliver a record level of skills training across Scottish society in 25,000 modern apprentices. This is not the time to go down the road of abolition and structural change. This is the time to get behind our enterprise agencies and skills development in Scotland and give them the political support which their level of performance merits and deserves.
That concludes questions to the First Minister. Can I remind members that we are going to members' business, and therefore they should leave quietly and quickly.